Welcome to this episode of HuntStand's Deer Dirt. Right in front of me is a tree stand that I call the scrape tree. So anytime you've got a name for a tree stand, there's a pretty good chance that that spot has some history and has been a good producer over the years. This one, I think, gains its reputation not so much because of how perfectly well it sets up, but the action that I've had in the few times that I've sat here over the years. I'm down in a valley, and if you followed my teachings over the years, you know that I don't like stands down in valleys because the wind swirls in those spots, and it's really hard to hunt them effectively because, depending upon what direction, mosquitoes are bad this morning. Depending on what direction the wind is coming from, you might have deer on all 360 degrees around you that know that you're there. And that's not a good recipe if you're trying to have a great hunt. So let's talk about why that happens, how you can predict it, and then a little bit about what you can do about it. I mean, how is it that I'm still hunting this stand? Given the fact that stands in valleys are usually a real problem. So first, let's talk about swirling and why it occurs. So if you take the trout stream analogy or the creek analogy, anytime there's a protected spot that's out of the main current, you'll see the water eddying, making a little pool, little eddy pool, kind of swirls back in there. It's the same thing with air flowing over the terrain. Anytime you've got a protected pocket, the main flow of the wind over the terrain is going to go into that protected pocket and swirl around and loop around and make what would be the same as like an eddy in a stream. So you have to avoid those kind of spots. If it's protected from the main flow, in most conditions you're going to be in big trouble when you hunt there because your scent is going to be blown in all different directions. And you can predict these fairly well even just using the HuntStand app or their website, because you're going to see the terrain, and hopefully you've been following the series this year, and I've talked a lot more about terrain features. And in fact, last week I talked about how to identify draws that might have ditches in them and so forth. So that the contour lines on the topographical maps show you what the terrain looks like. So anytime you see a valley, especially a narrow one, if it's a cross or at a 90-degree angle to the wind, there's going to be swirling in there. It's guaranteed. It's going to be blowing almost, I'd say almost with certainty, at the opposite direction on the bottom of that valley is what it's blowing over the top of it, because the wind will come over, hit that protected space, and then swirl down through and just loop down through the bottom. So that explains what causes it, and a little bit about how you can find it. Again, you can just think in really simple terms. If it's protected from the main flow of the wind, it's going to swirl. And sometimes it's even the habitat that does that. I mean, I've hunted where you've got some really, really thick trees, in tall, thick trees, usually early season, and then you're in an opening, like even on a ridge top, where the wind comes over the top of those trees. It gets slowed down as it blows over the trees, so it's not blowing through them. So when it comes over it, now it goes into that protected space behind and swirls. So you can even have swirling that's not related to the terrain. It's just 100% related to the cover. So that's another one to keep in mind. I've had some hunts that were pretty challenging until I figured that out, that it's not just the terrain that causes swirling. But now let's talk a little bit about when some of these locations can work. And again, I'm standing next to the scrape tree, and I killed a really nice buck here in 2022. And the situation, the setup, the wind was coming from behind me, and that's where the deer generally come out. There's not a whole lot down below me as you go down the draw. There's a pond down there and just a little tiny back end of this food plot that's planted up in here. But the majority of the deer come out on the upwind, uphill side. So in the evenings, when the wind starts to lay down, the thermals pull, especially in this country where you've got a lot of elevation changes. The thermals pull down. The thermals go in the same direction that the water would go if you poured out a whole, massive amount of water. Well, consider the rains, when the water runs off after a rain, what direction does it go? That's where the air is going to go. That's where your scent is going to go in the evenings when the wind lays down. So the cooler air descends, takes your scent with it, and goes right down these valleys. So that was the situation that evening. It worked out really well. I mean, there were even deer around us on both sides, but they didn't smell us. But again, the thermals were pulling my scent down, down this valley. And that happens pretty commonly because it falls into shade a lot earlier than the ridges around it. So it's a perfect place for the cooler air to drop into. Another time when this works is when the wind is in the same direction as the draw. So this one lays almost straight north-south. We get a lot of northwest wind in the fall. So if it's coming in here at a 45-degree angle or even more towards the north, it's going to funnel right down this valley. And I'm going to get the same exact effect with the wind as what I would get with the thermals, taking my scent down the valley. So as long as you're hunting on the lower end of where the deer movement may occur, then you can take advantage of both thermals or the wind that goes in the same direction as the valley. I don't think I would hunt this if the wind was coming up the valley though, because now again you're moving towards where all the deer are at. It has to be coming from the north or the northwest and pulling down this valley. The final way, and this is the most successful or the most bulletproof way to hunt these places, is to hunt out of a blind and keep the windows closed. And I've done a bunch of that. I mean, there's really two places that I hunt out of blinds. One is when I'm hunting right around a food plot or a field edge, because the deer come out in all different directions and it's really super hard to get the perfect wind. So being in the blind, makes you just makes it a little bit easier to keep the deer from knowing you're there. Or in places where the wind swirls, like this valley. And I do pull a blind up in here if I'm going to hunt any place but this lower end where the scrape tree is. So if I wanted to hunt further up the valley for whatever reason, I'd have to have a blind in here, and that's the way I'd hunt it. So that's the bottom line on swirling wind. You have to avoid them. You have to avoid them anytime you can. They aren't your friend. I don't know any situation where swirling ever helped me. So you can sometimes hunt those locations where the wind swirls, as long as you can set up a wind direction or a thermal that will take your scent away from the places where the deer come out. Well, I appreciate you joining me. I'll see you right back here again soon for the next episode of HuntStand's Deer Dirt.